Alrighty. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third live chat in our 2023 series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. My name is Marav Sarwar, and I'm the recruitment director with the fellowship. You've probably heard from me many times as you've learned more, but I will be your moderator for today's chat. The live chat series is an opportunity for you to ask fellows your questions, and we hope that through these chats you'll see how the fellowship can impact policy and transform your career. To put today's session in context, we're hosting one chat each month during the application season. We're glad you're here today and invite you to join us for the remaining sessions in September and October. As you can see, each chat will try to focus on different aspects of the fellowship experience and will feature different fellows as panelists. Today, we'll discuss how an STPF fellowship impacts a fellow's career trajectory and the range of motivations for pursuing a fellowship at any career stage. A quick reminder, in case you haven't heard, STPF is currently accepting applications through November 1st. Someone who applies this year will be considered for a position in the 2024-25 fellowship class. These fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy. For 2023 applicants, positions are available in all three branches of federal government: executive, legislative, and judicial. You can apply to 2 of these 3 program areas. For a sense of timing, someone who applies in 2023 will be considered for a position in the fellowship class that runs from September of 2024 all the way to August of 2025. Applicants must be U.S. citizens, hold a doctoral degree in the sciences, social sciences, or engineering, and cannot be a full-time federal or AAAS employee. Those of you with a master's in engineering plus 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. This is a paid 1-year full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. If you're still wondering if you're eligible to apply or interested in the application overview, visit our application portal. The link is in our chat box now to learn the ins and outs of STPF eligibility and the application. Okay, on to the purpose of today's chat, for you to ask fellows your questions. You can use the question box in your menu bar as shown here, and if you like, you can indicate the person or people to whom your question is directed to. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can today. And now I'm very happy to introduce you to our fellows. Dale Oliver is a 22 to 23 AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow with an assignment at the National Science Foundation to support monitoring and evaluation of the improving undergraduate STEM education program for Hispanic serving institutions. After serving as Dean of the College of Natural Resources and Sciences, he was on leave from his faculty position in the Department of Mathematics at Cal Poly Humboldt in far west Northwest California, where his 30-plus year career has included teaching and scholarly activities related to the mathematical preparation of teachers and to improving STEM education for all. Nathan Dadot is our AGU AAAS Congressional Science Fellow working for Senator John Ossoff. He has a PhD in Earth System Science from Stanford University, where he studied hydrologic change and wildfire risk. He previously worked on hazardous waste issues at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Kenna Rucastle is an ecosystem ecologist who has studied the impact of climate change on soil carbon and nutrient fluxes in a global network of climate change experiments distributed across 10 different mountain ranges from Greenland to Argentina. Her research links the ecological efforts of climate change to the consequences of a warmer world for the ecosystem services supplied by working lands. As a AAAS fellow, Kenna has supported the quantification of greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture, forestry, and land use sectors. She has also led engagements with developing countries such as Vietnam, Costa Rica, El Salvador, and South Africa under the EPA's Transparency Accelerator to support other countries in the development and improvement of their own GHG inventory systems. Thank you all for being here today. You're some very impressive people, so glad to have you all here. Before we get into questions from the audience, I'll kick it off with one. And today's chat is a little bit about career exploration and professional opportunities for fellows. You all kind of came in at different points in your career. What was your motivation or inspiration for pursuing a policy fellowship at this point of in your career? And Dale, I hope I can actually pick on you to start us off.
Sure, thanks. My motivation certainly was perhaps different in that I wasn't looking for a new career trajectory, but I did want to learn and to serve. And in fact, found out that there are some career trajectories that are still available for someone like me who's near, has had a long career in academia. But I wanted to learn more about how government worked, and particularly I wanted to learn more about granting agencies. And I was fortunate enough to be placed at the National Science Foundation, where I found ways to serve that agency that I perhaps hadn't expected at first, and feel now I'm back at my faculty position and feel like I've really gained a perspective that will help me as my institution continues to grow and develop and interact with granting agencies. That's it for now.
Nathan or Ganna, do you want to take that?
Sure, I can hop in here. I would like to think of a career in policy less of like a change in my career trajectory, and more like something that I've was really interested in pursuing all along, even before graduate school. I think that I came to the idea of science policy knowing that I was good at science. That's what I could bring to the table. And so I went to grad school to really like garner some expertise in an area. And I think my experience in grad school really underscored my motivation to do policy. All of the things I was studying as a climate change ecologist was really just highlighting the urgency of the things that are coming down the pipes for us in a warmer world, and the changes that are already happening to our planet. And I really wanted to do more about on the action side of that. I think that, do we know everything about what climate change is going to do? Absolutely not. And we will continue to learn about those impacts. But I think I knew enough to want to do something to maybe avoid those more dramatic effects of climate change. And so I saw this, the AAAS Fellowship is a really powerful on-ramp to the policy world, and in a role that really allows me to leverage my scientific expertise to interact with the policy that's happening in DC and at the EPA.
Yeah, so for me, about 2 years ago now, when I was considering an application to this fellowship, I was nearing the end of my PhD program, and I was thinking about what's next. A lot of the big decision at that point is sort of, do I stay in academia? Do I go into some other thing, which there's all kinds of options, but I don't really know about them. And so, not having a good understanding of sort of what options were out there, I feel like this opportunity through a fellowship is this experiential sort of opportunity, which couldn't really replicate in other ways. I had previously worked at the EPA prior to grad school, so that was on the executive branch side, but I hadn't had any experience with legislation, and so that was sort of my main focus and why I applied to the congressional fellowship. I think Kenna brought up something about the urgency of climate change. Certainly for me, something that played a role in my calculus in applying to a fellowship was that there are different, I think anything that you do, you can have an impact in whatever issue area, but then certainly the time scale for impact can differ depending on where you are and what you're working on. And when something becomes law, it has to be sort of the full force of the U.S. government goes into action behind it. And so whether you're in the congressional fellowship or in the executive branch, through regulatory means, there's this impact is a bit more shortened in the time scale, and so that was something that appealed to me as well.
Nice. I think kind of from like listening to all that, you all kind of came in with different reasons and different reasons of what about the fellowship really kind of like spoke to you. We'd love to hear like kind of like what you took out of the fellowship in terms of skills. So like, what did you gain from fellowship experience in skills or knowledge, even or a network as well?
I'll kind of reiterate something that Nathan said, which is I think not enough, like you could never say too much about the value of this experience to really figure out where, like to work in science policy is this very amorphous thing that you could do at a variety of angles. You don't even, that's not necessarily requires you to even be in the US government or even state government. And I think that this experience really allowed me, it put me into contact with people doing policy in a variety of different ways. Even within the EPA, I got to talk to people working on designing and implementing regulations within the EPA, talking to people that are, just maintaining longstanding, Clean Air Act 1970s era policies and designing kind of the future of those policies. I got to talk to contractors that are doing a lot of the technical work for the government. I got to talk to, people within my own branch and at various levels of like the EPA leadership hierarchy about the work they do and what their day looks like. And so I got to explore, I think one big thing I took away from this is the knowledge of where I could plug in given, I guess my strengths and my interests in terms of how much do I want to be doing technical things versus kind of maybe driving the vision or the trajectory of different technical efforts. So you're kind of delegating technical tasks. And that's really helped me figure out where I want to plug into science policy. And I've learned so many different soft skills related to that. Thinking about, I do have all of these technical skills, but is it the best use of my time to be doing those? Or should I be is it taking away from bigger picture tasks if I'm spending, days coding or things like that? And so you really have to kind of figure out what's the goal here and how do we best achieve that as a team. And there's lots of different aspects of project management that I think mirror the skills that we hone in academia, but are just kind of, there's different players and different names and different acronyms that apply to government work. And I think it's been, the AAAS network is pretty powerful. Every interagency, anything I've been on, there's always been AAAS alumni that have reached out to me, and I've had coffee with many of them, and it's really cool to see where we end up in government and to interact with the AAAS community broadly. It's a really exciting year, and I can't believe that I'm nearing the end of that. So.
I'm going to pick up on what Kenna said about AAAS fellows and alumni that are sort of already are throughout the government. One of the things that I really am passionate about is broadening participation in STEM, and dug in deeply through the NSF into what it means to transform an institution of higher education. What does it mean to transform to serve the students that are coming through the door, the students that are much more diverse than the faculty? And in that role, I got to interact with other agencies that are working on the same thing, because there are multiple agencies, often with sort of different takes on improving a particular situation. In this case, I'm talking about broadening participation. And what do you know? AAAS fellows were leading those efforts in the other agencies that I was talking with. So it's been really interesting to see how folks have used this experience to continue to serve in really important ways in the government. And to see that landscape, you have to sort of be in it. And that's an exciting part about being a fellow.
Yeah, so just to check, so the question's, what skills did we learn? What knowledge have we gained, and how have we broadened our network? Is that right?
Those are great listening skills.
Okay. Yeah, so one skill that I've learned has been active listening this year. I'd say that, before I would have just thought, oh yeah, I'm fine at listening, I'm fine in meetings. But it's different when you're in a congressional office and then you have to probably met with over 100 stakeholders and constituents this year, sometimes with no preparation or background. And these are people who have real sort of interests that can be aligned with what the person you're working for is trying to promote. And so it's on you to really represent the office and to be a good listener. And I think, that's been a big thing that big skill that I've gained that I feel like will apply to any future profession. In terms of other skills, I think just in general, working as a congressional staffer, it's just so opposite of the pace and the collaboration that you're working at in graduate school or in a research setting. Whereas in research you might be thinking months, year-long time frames. Oftentimes with a memo, you might have to do it within a few days, sometimes even a couple hours to make a recommendation on something. And so, just getting used to that and has been a huge difference. And I think through that, I've learned about myself and also just new skills for memo writing, writing succinctly, communicating succinctly, although maybe, I don't know if that comes across right now. In terms of knowledge, I didn't really understand how Congress worked before. I'd seen some things as a kid in Schoolhouse Rock, but to be able to participate in it directly really has been, more eye-opening than any other way that I could have done it. And to be able to get the responsibilities, at this level, I think is sort of an advantage that the fellowship has than over, something like applying directly to a job. In terms of the network, I'll just mirror what everyone else said about the AAAS network is full of leaders throughout governments, industry, academia, nonprofits. These are all people that you can talk to. I've learned that the most powerful question I can ask is, I want to learn about your job and what you do, what you like about it, what's challenging. And everyone I've found in DC is really open to that. It's sort of a different culture maybe than the traditional research where you're kind of siloed and everyone sort of assumes what other people are doing without actually asking them. And so that's been a big change for me in terms of culture and in terms of learning from other people in trying to build a network.
So question from the chat, Dale, it sounds like you're back in your job for academia. For Kenna and Nathan, what's next for you all at the end of the fellowship? Is policy work something that you still want to stay in after completing the fellowship?
Sure. I think I've really enjoyed everything I've been working on as a fellow and see the potential of what I could be working on as a full federal employee as really promising. So I'm absolutely, I've renewed for a second year of my fellowship here at the EPA in my branch, but am actively pursuing full employment here at the EPA, and I'm also considering other agencies that do some of the climate work that we partner with on a regular basis, NOAA, NASA, USDA. So more of the same is my career trajectory.
Yeah, in the congressional fellowship, unfortunately, most people cannot stay on for a second year, which is a really sort of nice feature of most executive branch placements. So I've been thinking about job search for a couple of months now. I'm going to be working at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is part of the administration on climate and environment issues. I think throughout the year, I realized that I wanted to stay in sort of a policy-oriented job just because I've enjoyed the work and the pace. And it seems to fit better with what I've learned about how my interests and my work style.
Diving into that, this is an interesting question, is did any of you consider going into consulting or management or even like IP law rather than policy work? And if so, kind of like what led you to choose the policy path?
Yes, I definitely considered consulting. I think I honestly had absolutely no idea how integral some of these consulting firms and contractors are important to the work of the EPA, for example. Speaking, this is my view here, but they do a lot of the technical work. You know, a lot of my day-to-day is really thinking about like what work we want done, what, you know, where do we need to do more research, what data gaps do we need to fill for the US greenhouse gas inventory, you know, what is the future of what we do, this like product that we create. And you know, a lot of the day-to-day rubber meets the road technical work that, you know, it is most familiar to me, maybe as a scientist, you know, who's coming off a year of postdoc, you know, after my PhD, that was most familiar. So I think at first I was very like, ooh, maybe that's what I want to do, because I have the programming skills, I have like the you know, data statistical background to be doing that work. And I set up a lot of informational interviews with consultants from several different firms to talk to them about like what their day-to-day looks like, and also what their the stability of their jobs looks like, because often these contracts that they're working on are temporary, right? And so they have very little control over what they get assigned and what they do, but it can come with some flexibility in terms of remote work, or maybe more variety in what you do, because they are kind of working on numerous different contracts, some, you know, outside of the federal government at any one time. So I think there's a lot of variety and a lot more technical work there, but I think I ultimately enjoyed this kind of long-term vision and taking more of like a steering role and directing that technical work. And so I think that that's what's ultimately influenced my decision to want to stay in the federal government instead of doing some of the consulting. But I certainly think that even if some like constraints in my personal life had been different, if I needed to be somewhere other than DC, or if I needed a little more flexibility in that regard, that consulting would have maybe been more appealing.
In my AAAS fellowship, I also worked with consultants who were doing some evaluation work for the government. And what do you know, there were AAAS fellows in those groups who used the AAAS opportunity as a springboard into consulting. And yeah, there is some temporary nature. There is a temporary nature, but usually the firms themselves tend to be pretty stable, because they know how to work with the government well. But I also wanted to say that policy, really, when you think about it in the AAAS world, think about it in the broadest sense, because not all of us were working on the Hill. Nathan was, but we're in agencies where the policy influence is much more incremental. And that doesn't mean that it's not important. It really is. And one thing I learned about the fellowship is that the agencies really want to be informed by their constituents. So there's a lot of need for learning about careful listening, but also synthesizing from many different voices for the leadership of those agencies. That's I failed to mention that earlier. That's one of the things I feel like I really gained from the fellowship, was that an additional capacity to synthesize from many different information sources.
Yeah, I didn't really get a chance to consider consulting opportunities very closely, though I've met some folks in the Hill who did come from consulting. You know, my impression is that it provides a really good opportunity to learn about different projects in a variety of topics like relatively quickly, and that it's also communication is prioritized. I think in both of those ways, it's kind of similar to a position on the Hill as a staffer, but I think you're paid better. So I think it sounds like a great opportunity, and something I would probably consider some point in the future.
Thinking through other career routes, I really like this question too, is do you feel that the experience that you got through STPF would prepare you for a policy position back in your home state to go back to instead of working for the federal government? And do you think, even if not if that you were considering, but do you think that would be something that if it would be beneficial or not?
I can jump in first since I keep going last. So yeah, I think at least I'll speak just for Congress. Certainly because I've been working for a senator that is very focused on state issues and being responsive to constituent issues and concerns. We have interacted a lot with state and local government and making sure that the federal government is supporting their needs. I think we've had some good insight and experience through that. I think, a lot of what you really are learning is just how to form relationships with important decision makers, and then using those relationships to solve problems. I think that that's a skill that can be used at any level, whether it be local, state, or federal.
I've also considered actually, maybe not for my home state of Tennessee, given local politics, unfortunately, but I have certainly considered doing the work, working for state governments. Also, probably from like the executive branch, like a state environmental agency level. One of the exciting things that my division has been involved in at the EPA is through the Inflation Reduction Grant, or the Inflation Reduction Act, set up substantial money. We're talking like billions of dollars for states to through climate pollution reduction grants. So essentially giving money to states to try out new technologies, new strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which I think is pretty incredible work, and really at the scale where we would hopefully see a lot of this. The most important climate action is at the local and state level. So I've definitely considered opportunities that would allow me to play a role in kind of designing sorts of mitigation strategies for states. And states are also required to develop their own state level greenhouse gas inventories to be able to track the effectiveness of these policies that they're trying out. So I could essentially be, doing the work that, I've been supporting here at the EPA for our national greenhouse gas inventory at a much smaller level and probably broader. I wouldn't just have like maybe the agriculture sector on my portfolio, but be really trying to do a economy-wide inventory. So I think that there's really exciting work in the climate action space that can be done at the state level that I've absolutely considered.
I'll just chime in a little bit. I think that a lot of state agencies benefit from the kind of management skills that AAAS fellows naturally sort of obtain as we're assigned projects and given opportunities to be parts of larger projects. For me, as a former academic dean, I certainly have some opportunities at the state level for that kind of thing, management in state agencies, and the AAAS Fellowship sort of is opening doors that I didn't know were there.
I think, something that's interesting to call out too, especially for our audience here, is that there's a lot of state policy fellowship programs that are also, really coming up and doing great work too. I think STPF represents like kind of like a great program on the federal side. And I think, as people who want to, create more opportunities for people over scientists to be active in policy, like that's something that I would definitely encourage folks to listen to, right? Because not everyone can have the opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. and, and go through the entire experience. I do think that serves as a good transition for this other question, is how you all kind of made the transition to DC and how that felt. And just really, I think something that I'd love to also hear you all on is, how was the experience of joining the fellowship in DC, right? Nathan, you made this point of like, this wasn't just a job, right? This isn't a job offer that you take. I think you are joining a community of people. So we'd love to, kind of throw out, how is it like moving to DC, but also kind of coming in with this network of folks and this community of fellows that you are also engaging with, even if you're not seeing them every day?
Sure, I can go first again. So yeah, I'd say, first part of that question, how is the transition? I think because I was just graduating from my graduate program, that, it was a natural break. Something I'd been thinking about for many years was, well, what's next? It's going to be at this time. And so I sort of knew that there would be this opportunity to leave where I was in California and go somewhere else. And so it's pretty amazing to me when there are folks like Dale who are in one place and know they're probably gonna go back or open at least to that option. And so it's a very sort of kind of different considerations that are at stake there. But for me, my family moved with me. My wife and I had a baby, still have one, and so we drove across the country. We had to find an apartment, but luckily I had 2 months in between. What you'll find is that every fellow is different, and that some are moving here like the weekend before the fellowship starts. Other people don't get here for a couple of months. They're not going to start their exact placement yet, and so everyone does it a little bit differently. But the nice thing is that everyone is here pretty much for the orientation program. Everyone gets this base knowledge, and everyone has that shared experience, and so you're able to at least feel that community from this cohort of fellows, which is a nice aspect of the program, which kind of cushions the transition.
Yeah, so I came knowing that I would return back to my institution in California, but and actually several others who were also placed at the National Science Foundation were in the same situation, either taking a leave of absence or a sabbatical or something like that from their institution, knowing that they would likely go back. Not all of them do. But because I knew I was going to be either 1 or 2 years, turned out to be 1, my wife and I just went with some clothing and got a furnished apartment in DC. There are plenty of them. Some of them are a little pricey, but what do you know? And didn't take a car. We used public transport everywhere. We're kind of from a rural area, so that was a big change for us. But we turned out loving it. DC is just a great place to explore. Lots of things going on, which was exciting. Anyway, I and some of the other fellows who are like me, coming from institutions going back to it, kind of bonded a little bit, and we formed our own community as well. So there are lots of opportunities for community and lots of different ways to get yourself to and from DC, and yeah, I think it's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, I moved to DC. I'm going to be candid here. I was pretty skeptical that I would like DC. I'd heard so much about, oh, it's just a bunch of suits, and like it's not, and like, oh, it's a swamp, it's so hot and humid, and it's just kind of miserable in the summer. And so I was just kind of excited about this job, but thinking like the location was a disadvantage, and I could not have been more wrong. And I think that's influenced by several different things. I think the act of moving here was very overwhelming, it seems like such a big city. I'd never tried to rent in such a big city and certainly pay the rent that I'm paying in this big city. But I think we're compensated well as fellows, and I think that it's after getting over that hurdle, I think I've never been in a place where I feel like people are such nerds about what they do. And I mean that in the best way possible. Like, you'll go to a bar by yourself and you'll end up talking to someone who they're just leading with what they do because they're just so passionate about what they do. And I found that maybe that's just kind of like, I was looking for that in my life. So I'm kind of like really, I find that super fulfilling and fun to just meet these people that are really passionate and you know, doing things I'd never even heard of. So I think that that's a really cool part of the city. And you're also moving here with, I don't even know, like, you know, a couple hundred people who are also moving here and in need of friends and who have fun interests outside of what they do. And so these natural kind of communities, as Dale said, will certainly form. And that's been the case for me. But also I've found it pretty easy to make friends outside the fellowship, which I can't say I've had that experience in anywhere else I've lived. So I play on like a rec soccer league that I joined within like 2 weeks of being here. I play pickup soccer with some other people. I'm in a running club. So I think that there's easy to find, you know, like-minded people and to find friends that make, you know, your life outside of work really fulfilling, and to make this move feel like less of this just, you know, you're moving for this job and, you know, making sacrifices maybe in your personal life. I've actually found the opposite to be true. So I've really felt like this has been an incredible opportunity for my career, but also just for me as a person.
Yeah, DC's a great city. I can't say that more than enough times. I generally enjoy it here, except for it's been very hot sometimes, and that does stink. You will sweat. The sweating is a lot. One of the terms that I used to say a lot, and like when I used to lead like groups with college students, is like roses and thorns, and I feel like we've kind of like talked a lot about the roses of the fellowship. And so, one of the questions that we have right now is, what is something that you found was particularly challenging about either your fellowship or the agency that you work with, any part of like orientation, or what did you find challenging, or kind of like what do you, you know, wish were things that we can improve upon or were different?
I'll start with something that was challenging. To be placed in an agency where there's lots of other folks who are there either permanently or as at the National Science Foundation, they're rotators. It took a little while to figure out where my work would be impactful, and if it would be impactful, right? Because everybody is busy and they've got their own things to do. And so just what helped with overcoming that challenge was just to be, what Nathan said earlier, to be really a careful and active listener, to find out what needs your particular skill set really could support the agency and the work and the mission and better policy. So it just takes some time. At least it did for me. I didn't really feel like I hit the ground running, but by a few months, everything was fine. It just takes a little time to adjust and fit into an agency, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I appreciate that sentiment. It was, you know, I felt a similar way when I started in Congress. It was this October recess of last year, and recess is when, you know, all the representatives are out of town. That means that a lot of staff are not around. And so to start in the middle of this time and not really know how I can be useful, it's disorienting, because you've had, you know, as a researcher, so much like purpose, you know, what's the next step all the time. And so, you know, of course, adjusting to any new job is more difficult, but then to do so, you know, at certain times of year might be more difficult. You know, in my case, I had a mentor who just started, you know, my supervisor in the office just 3 months before me, and so there was also this learning curve there. And I think sometimes, a lot of folks in the policy world, don't have a scientific background. They don't really know what you're capable of. They think that maybe you're good with numbers, but that you're not necessarily gonna be good at writing, and so they won't trust you on certain things right off the bat. And so you kind of have to build that trust. You have to build relationships, and it takes time. And if you're only here for a year or maybe two, then that time is limited. And so I found myself at the beginning of the fellowship really itching to go. But there came this point in the middle of the year when everything legislatively, since I'm in Congress, really all these deadlines fell at the same time, and I think that was this nice opportunity to really be able to show, well, here are the things that I can do. I can take on more responsibilities and be a real contributing part of the team.
I think that this is related, but maybe like a certain take. I think something that I was challenging that I didn't really anticipate being challenging is being comfortable taking on the role of being an expert. So kind of like Nathan said, like maybe it's even more pronounced when you're in, a small office for, a representative, and you are the science person just in general, like this Bill Nye figure that's supposed to know all the answers to science. But I think for me, even in, a pretty narrow world of greenhouse gas inventory space, people would just come to me and be like, oh, you've been tasked with reading about this for 2 weeks. Now we would like you to be the expert in this. And I'm sitting here thinking like, excuse me, like I have a PhD in something that I don't quite feel comfortable being recognized as an expert in doing yet, and so I think that this is something where you kind of got to realize like the pace of government, and it's kind of like Nathan and Dale both said, like there's this value in your ability to just take in information and just kind of your rough sense of things that you have arrived at as a scientist, gathering information, and you're just going to give your best guess. And people are, this is not like a site reference sort of statement. This is just like, we need a sort of like educated guess on this and some like informed, just some information to move forward and arrive at a decision. And I think I've definitely gotten more comfortable in that role and just being like, this is what I think, here are maybe some like quick caveats, but like I'm pretty confident in this. And also when to say I have no idea. And I actually, it's not just that I don't have an idea, it's like maybe we don't have enough information as a scientific community to have an idea about this. And I think related to that, I've also struggled, at least early on, to get a sense of pace. So I think I was like really just trying to like grind things out, just like get things done quickly and as thoroughly as possible. And, my boss would be like, great, can you do this? And I would be like, sure, I can have it to you by like tomorrow. And he would be like, I was thinking 2 weeks. And so you kind of just like, oh, okay. Part of that is like getting a sense of what kind of level of thoroughness is required. Is this like something that's going to be, really the building blocks for something very important, or is this just something we need some quick summary information on? And then other times I've been like, great, I have a lot of time to do this, and then realize that this isn't very urgent. So I think part of that is, as both Dale and Nathan have said, you have a mentor that kind of will give you some like indicators on these things. But I think agencies and probably offices are taking you on as a AAAS fellow because you are an expert in something and they're looking for expertise in something. And so you're doing yourself and your office a disservice if you don't kind of grow into that role and be the expert and just kind of be the scientist in the room. And I think that that's what they're looking for. And I felt like I had more impact when I'm comfortable taking on that role.
I just think that's such a great point, kind of, and I think that's like when I'm recruiting and I'm kind of like talking to folks who are like starting to learn about the program, and if you've been grinding away at academia, you've been surrounded by professors all the time, and it's like it's hard to really go like, actually, no, I am an expert in this field, and kind of like really establishing that like if you are qualified for this and you put in the work, like you will be that, right? Depending, and I cannot like agree with that more. Some of the questions that we've also gotten on the chat is, just I'll kind of like summarize this very quickly, is when governments change and how does that affect us at the fellowship, or when parties change. I think one of the things I've heard a lot from former fellows, and one of the soft skills that you gain is kind of being able to work across difference and you know, engaging with people that have different beliefs than you. If that was something that, you know, that you worked through at your time in the fellowship, or is that something that you kind of like encountered? Would love to just hear your general experience about working across people that are different.
I can jump in. Yeah, so you know, Congress right now is divided. When we started, I'm sort of envious of last year's fellows who, many of them, you know, working on environmental issues at least, they had such a big opportunity to pass legislation since there was a unified government, and then now we've got a different party in the House and the Senate. But what I realized, you know, quickly was that, you know, 90% of the legislation is still going to be things that people are finding consensus on. You know, we often hear about in the news those issues that are really divisive and which both parties are trying to negotiate around. But you know, a lot of important things can be done in terms of regulations. You know, I'll just give an example. You know, there's some program that might have been existing in the federal government for a few decades. Certainly, it's not going to be necessarily at the you know, taking into account new science, new technologies, or just a you know, changing landscapes and surrounding an issue. And so there's a lot of opportunity really to make improvements and to try and be forward thinking and on issues that are not necessarily going to be so partisan. And so I think, you know, part of my experience in being in Congress is that there's so many opportunities in those spaces to make a difference that, you know, I haven't had to be too concerned about, you know, the fact that there are two different parties that are in Congress.
I have it is certainly something that I also had questions about. I think when I was interviewing the West Virginia versus EPA Supreme Court case, either it was coming up to be heard by the Supreme Court or it had just been decided, that basically kind of limited the Clean Power Plan, the Obama administration era attempt at kind of limiting greenhouse gas emissions from coal-fired power plants. And so it seemed like a time when maybe morale would be low. As an outsider, I was like, this must be a rough time to be at the EPA. And I think people's answers were just really comforting in a sense, that as a climate scientist, that, you know, first of all, these big flashy things like the Inflation Reduction Act don't happen in the 3 months that they're kind of in the public spotlight. This is the result of decades or a decade and years at least of iterating on something that works, and it just happens to be at this moment that it happens. But there are so many policies that have been in the works for a long time, and often in times of, you know, at the EPA, if we have administrations that are not, you know, don't take maybe favorable stances on climate action, it's a time of like thinking about what are we going to do when the pendulum swings back the other way. And I think that there can be these times. It certainly seems to be an attitude and a stress on the EPA now when you know there were staffing cuts and you know people left the agency in the previous administration, and now we have a ton of work to do to implement the Inflation Reduction Act, and we're short staffed. But to be at a place that's so mission driven and to believe so you know, steadfastly in what the EPA is doing, that we need to protect the environment and human health, I think that that's a really big motivator. And you look at all these government think tank, you know, indicators of morale, and EPA consistently ranks as some of the highest, despite kind of the volatility in funding for the agency with administration changes. But I will also caveat that by, like, you know, it's a very keep calm and carry on sort of mentality here, but at the same time, am I thinking about getting a job sooner rather than later to, you know, batten down the hatches against a possible administration change? Certainly. So I think that there's a little bit of both. I think it's been pretty comforting to know that there's work going on behind the scenes that doesn't really get the spotlight during maybe unfavorable political environments. But at the same time, it does affect things like are we hiring? Will there be a job for me? Sort of questions like that.
I was kind of surprised in my agency, the National Science Foundation, how consistent the work towards the mission of the agency had been over multiple administrations. You know, science is a bipartisan topic, if I could be so bold as to say that, and equity is bipartisan. Folks want all aspects of society to be engaged in and benefit from scientific work and innovation. So I think maybe the work and the mission of the agency sort of goes, you know, continues on, even if administrations change, of course, with a few exceptions. But you know, those exceptions really are, I think, are temporary. Temporarily, some mission components may be shifted by a change in administration, but the long term, and many of the people at the agencies that I've talked to they're thinking about the long term and the long trajectory, and I think it's a bipartisan direction.
I think I'll like add to that too. Like, I don't think I realized as just like a citizen, like that, you know, just because there's a certain attitude of the presiding administration, you know, there are laws on the books. It does not matter, you know, what, you know, the president in 2020 said. You know, in 1990, Congress told the EPA that every year they had to produce a greenhouse gas inventory. So it doesn't matter that the division is named the Climate Change Division. It does not matter what the president might think about climate change. Like, this is a statutory obligation that would take another act of Congress to repeal that responsibility and authority. So there's so much just like baked in. And that's, you know, like, I think what we see in the news and like kind of some of the scary things like, oh my gosh, we're, you know, decimating the environment and our environmental regulation, like that's the tip of the iceberg. And actually, like, there's a lot of work that's just kind of baked in that will keep going regardless of 4-year swings in politics. So I think that that should be encouraging to everyone. I hope you like can sleep better at night knowing that.
I just want to say one more word of encouragement. You know, in my year and the many people that I've met through the fellowship, I just am really encouraged about the dedication and the skill of the federal workforce. I didn't really have a fully formed opinion at all because there are some folks with strong feelings one way or the other, but I was just impressed with the professionalism and you know, the hard work and of the folks that are leading and working in the agencies.
Thanks all. So we're getting pretty close to the end of the hour, so I'm going to give you all one last question. And so in talking with a lot of folks who are learning about us for the first time, you know, they'll kind of like ask like what the day-to-day is, and my answer is it's going to depend where you are, what agency you're at, and there's a lot of different places that our fellows are placed. And so, you know, many of them are coming from like grinding away on weekends at a lab or having these really crazy hours. Can you all talk through, like, you know, like, yes, you probably have a typical 40-hour work week, but can you all maybe talk through what your work-life balance has been as being a fellow?
I'll start. So I've been in academia for more than 30 years, and before that I was a high school teacher and always worked 50 to 60 hours or more, especially when I was a dean, a week. And 40 hours a week was essentially expected, but not more in the agency that I was placed in. I know there can be some variation, but I found that through the fellowship, I had the most time ever to read professionally, to really understand the issues that I was trying to, support the work in my agency than I've ever had in my career. So it was really a breath of fresh air for recharging my intellectual self. And then we had, it really was capped at 40 hours a week. And, that made it for a great work-life balance experience. Not all experiences are equal, but that was mine.
I can go. So yeah, this was one concern of mine. I'd heard anecdotally that congressional staffers can have pretty tough hours. Certainly, the number of issues that you could be working with at any given time is just a huge amount of work, and it's really a question of how many things can you get to. But something that I guess I'll just answer directly. My work week is probably about 40 hours too. Sometimes during the busiest times of year, maybe 50, 55. And that was only a specific time of year. But really, as a fellow, the office has respected sort of my boundaries. I tried to pick an office where everyone was sort of understanding that I had other obligations outside of the office, basically picking up a child from daycare and trying to put her to sleep. And so, yeah, I think that is something that talking to other congressional fellows, at least, it seems to have been mostly mirrored, that you get the access of a full staff member, but that you also are sort of insulated from the really intense kind of responsibilities that might take more time during the year. And one thing I'll add to that is that Congress is really cyclical. So about 20% of the time you're off, like August, there's a recess, but then other times of year, it's a lot busier. But there are these breaks that are sort of built in, and that's a lot of times when people are able to take vacation, they travel, they schedule doctor's appointments, and your job is basically 9 to 5, even if that, so.
Yeah, I have been just really, really satisfied, and just, I don't know, it's been really important to maintain that 40-hour work week, and there's been absolute support, and kind of just like, I don't even say it's like support, it's kind of like mandated that you have these work-life boundaries with this knowledge that overworking and being stressed and being tired doesn't benefit anyone. And I think my workload has been such that it's not like I'm having to like enforce a 40-hour work week and like leave some balls, like drop some balls as a result. Like, I think that my workload is tailored to having a very productive but 40-hour work week. There have certainly been times, we do a lot of like international capacity building, helping other countries develop greenhouse gas inventories. And so sometimes those weeks have been a little more time intensive, but there's, you're compensated. If you work more than a 40-hour week, if you're traveling on a Saturday and Sunday, you take those days off in your PTO. I remember being stressed when I first started that the only way to access my email was on my government computer that I left at the office Monday through Thursday. I was like, what if someone adds something to my calendar? What if I don't know about, there's an email that comes in after 5? And that was a silly stress. And people were like, then you respond to it when you get back to work. Like that's what you do with those emails. Or like, if people know that you work a 9 to 5 and they, they'll schedule meetings for 9 a.m. at the earliest. So I think it's a very wholesome lifestyle, and something that I am so much more productive than I ever was working, 80-hour weeks in my structured 40-hour week, and find that I'm looking forward to going back to work when I've been off on vacation. So I think it's really exciting.
Thank you all. Those were, I think, what a great panel. So really appreciate you all doing this, and thank you for being here. Couple housekeeping notes, if we can go through those. So STPF application is open. It's open through November 1st. Please get started on that. Make sure you apply if you're interested. We'll send you a recording of this conversation in the coming days, along with resources to support you in the application. Our next chat, this is our second to last one, will take place on September 14th, talking through of, what's the, what our fellows do beyond STPF. And if we couldn't get to your question today, you're always welcome to email us at fellowships@AAAS.org. Well, you can always contact our fellows too. They're probably the most wholesome group to reach out to, since they care about people being in this fellowship. So yeah, thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all for joining.